This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
انقضاء مهلة الأسبوعين التي كانت الدول الست الكبرى قد حددتها لإيران الرد على
The two-week deadline, which was given to Iran by the six major powers to answer an international offer to suspend its uranium enrichment program, has run out. Washington, London, and Paris renewed their threats of imposing new economic sanctions on Tehran if the latter fails to give a positive answer by the end of the day. This warning comes after all diplomatic efforts between Iran and the West have failed. The latest round of talks took place over the phone between the Iranian nuclear negotiator, Saeed Jalili, and European Union Foreign Policy Chief, Javier Solana. Such talks were described as unconstructive. Faiza Alak reports.
The two rivals went back to square one, where the language of threats and counter-threats is intensifying. The Iranian nuclear file, which is described by Tehran as civilian, may bring a barrage of new sanctions to the country. This is at least what the six superpowers leading negotiations with Iran are saying.
We, in the 5+1 countries, are expressing disappointment because we haven't yet received any answer from Iran, which was supposed to respond on July 29th, as agreed upon in Geneva. The Iranian nuclear chief negotiator Jalili told Solana that Iran will not give a written response tomorrow. If we don't receive a clear positive answer from Iran, we don't have any choice but to take additional measures against it.
In Iran, the famous phrase of the Iranian president, who said that his country will not move back an inch on its right of uranium enrichment, seems to dominate the Iranian counteroffer, as leaked from a letter received today by the EU Foreign Policy Chief, Javier Solana, who said that there will be no mention in the letter about Iran's intention to suspend uranium activities. The next move by the West seems to be heading towards imposing further economic sanctions against Iran. Meanwhile, on the Iranian front, the Iranian military continues testing a new anti-ship missile with a range exceeding 300 kilometers. However, such tests were downplayed by military experts in the West.
From Amman, we are joined by Sultan Hatem, the Director General of the Aruba Institute for Political Studies. Mr. Sultan, Iran was given a new deadline. Parallel to that, Iran reiterated its right of possessing civilian nuclear technology. What is the next step to be expected from the six leading powers?
لا يعرف أحد على وجه التحديد ما هي الإجراءات أو التدابير التي قال بها الغرب.
No one knows for sure the types of economic measures that would be taken by the West in general, or the European Union and the United States in particular. However, the main question is whether Iran will turn these types of measures into a showdown, which may lead to a cooling-off period that may ultimately be followed by yet another showdown. I think both sides, the West and the Iranians, are buying time, but the question is, when will they run into a new deadlock?
The Algerian Interior Minister, Nur al-Din Yazed Zarhouni, called on the citizens and security agencies to take more precautionary measures following the recent suicide attack that targeted one of the intelligence centers in the state of Tizi Ouzou, east of the capital of Algiers. The attack injured 25 people, including 4 police officers. According to the latest estimates, there have been more than 60 attacks with explosives in the state of Boumerdas and Tizi Ouzou during the first half of 2008.
The latest suicide operation in Tizi Ouzou, east of the Algerian capital of Algiers, was considered unsuccessful by the intelligence agencies. However, this is the 4th suicide operation this year and the first one in Tizi Ouzou. According to the Algerian intelligence, the terrorist groups who organized this operation had failed to achieve the intended objectives of killing a large number of people, which they usually do, to get media attention. Nevertheless, the target of this operation was the headquarters of the security forces in the middle of a crowded residential complex. This explains why 25 people were injured, including 4 police officers. The nearby buildings included the homes of 17 families were severely damaged. The suicide attacker drove a car carrying 1,000 kilograms of explosives towards a police station, only a few meters away from an army installation, but political observers still believe that this operation had failed to achieve the intended objectives. They believe that the perpetrators were in a state of panic because the security forces have intensified their activities. They also explained that this means that the Algerian security forces and terrorist groups are racing against time. While the terrorist groups are willing to use their human and material resources, despite the decrease in the number of people willing to join them and the decrease in the supply of explosives, weapons, and vehicles, the security forces are betting on their recent plans, which have proven to be effective on the ground. In addition, the Algerian people stand behind the government in confronting terrorism. This explains why the Algerian Interior Minister, Nur al-Din Zarhouni, called on citizens and security agencies to take more precautions. However, this is not the first time in which Algerian officials call on the people to take more precautions. Such calls have been made since terrorist operations started taking place in Algeria, but acts of violence have continued despite these calls. According to the security forces, the armed groups have launched more than 60 attacks using explosives in Boumerdas and Tizi Ouzou, in the eastern capital of Algiers, during the first half of 2008, killing dozens of people and injuring many others. Most of those who were killed were from security forces. In addition, dozens of others were kidnapped. This does not mean that the number of groups are decreasing. In fact, many of them have repented, taking advantage of the National Amnesty Program. This also does not mean that the army and the security forces have won the battle against the armed groups. It is clear that the operation of Tizi Ouzou is like the rest of terrorist operations. It has the thumbprint of Al-Qaeda. This makes one wonder about the wisdom of the statements that tend to be made by Algerian officials after every operation. They have always maintained that the armed Islamist groups, especially the Salafi group of the Islamic Call and Combat, have failed. In reality, the attacks have continued in different forms. The attacks are now focused on the security forces, police officers, and the army. In the past, most of the armed operations caused severe casualties and injuries among the civilians. The civilians were not necessarily the intended target, but they still fell victim to reckless planning by the perpetrators.
In Iraq, 2 U.S. occupation soldiers were killed and a third was injured. They fell into an armed ambush in the area of New Baghdad in the Iraqi capital. According to a statement by the U.S. occupation forces, the 2 soldiers were killed while on patrol due to an explosion of a roadside bomb. The occupation army immediately imposed a security zone around the area of the incident. This raised the death toll of U.S. soldiers in Iraq to 4,131 since its invasion in 2003. Meanwhile, Iraqi politicians said that progress in Iraq's security system support Iraqi negotiators to determine a timetable for the withdrawal of the occupation forces from the country. This falls within the planned security agreement between Iraq and the United States. At the same time, the commander of the British troops in southern Iraq attested to the Iraqi forces' readiness to take control of the security file. But he tied his troops' withdrawal to a decision by the governments of Iraq and Britain.
The abilities of the Iraqi security system are growing, giving the United States and British occupation forces less excuses to extend their stay in Iraq. The commander of the British troops in southern Iraq attested to the readiness of the Iraqi security forces to run the security responsibilities in the country. However, he said that the withdrawal of his troops from Iraq can only be decided by the governments of Britain and Iraq.
I think that the governments
will decide the future of the military troops. It is not my responsibility as a military commander to determine the country's external policy. I can say, however, that the security situation in southern Iraq is much better.
During a parade of the Iraqi border patrol, Iraqi politicians said that the progress in the capabilities of the Iraqi military will support the position of the Iraqi negotiator in drafting the security agreement with the United States. This will play a role in defining a timetable for the withdrawal of the occupation forces from Iraq.
This gives a large amount of power to the Iraqi negotiator to demand the withdrawal of the multinational coalition troops in the near future.
The British troops have kept about 4,000 soldiers stationed at Al Basra International Airport. And even though the security responsibilities in the city of Al Basra was turned over to the Iraqi forces, the British troops have continued to carry out raids and arrests in various neighborhoods. The development in the capabilities of the Iraqi security forces is an additional push for the Iraqi negotiator to reshape and redraft the security agreement, which the United States insists on signing with Iraq. Naima Abdel-Razzaq, Al-Alam, Al-Basra.
Hundreds of Muslim protesters took to the streets of Kashmir in India. They protested a series of breaches and infringements committed by Hindus against Muslims in the nearby area of Jammu. Police clashed with the protesters, which blocked off the only street between the Kashmir Valley and other parts of India. Rocks were thrown, leading to the injury of about 50 people, including 20 police officers. The protesters in Jammu went out to condemn the Kashmir government's decision to transfer a piece of their land to a Hindu temple.
Parliament gives votes of confidence to 3 ministers proposed by President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Shamsuddin Hosseini takes the post of Economy Minister, receiving 218 votes in favor, 29 against and 23 abstentions. Ali Kordan was confirmed in office for the post of Interior Ministry, winning votes in, that is 169 votes in favor, 64 against and 36 abstentions. And Hamid Behbahani takes the responsibility of Roads and Transportation Ministry with 181 votes in favor, 51 against and 37 abstentions. The politically incorrect treatment of Iranian pilgrims by the Saudi officials has drawn fire from Tehran, but in the Saudi soil. Foreign Minister Manucheh Muttaqi, who is in Jeddah for an OIC ministerial meeting, rejected the improper behavior as obstinate and far from respectful. Raising concerns about mistreating Iranian pilgrims in Saudi airports and checkpoints, Muttaqi said the incorrect move, irrespective of any ground it could have happened on, is unacceptable and could hurt the mutual ties. The top diplomat added the Iranian ambassador has been assigned to follow through the case through Saudi officials who are expected to give their all to correct the misbehavior. Muttaqi said Tehran willingly hopes to see positive measures on the part of Riyadh. Iran's judiciary spokesman strongly criticizes the West's double standard policy when it comes to the issue of human rights. Ali Reza Jamshidi said the European countries have time and again lauded Iran's fight against drug smugglers, but when they will get their punishments, the European human rights circles point the finger of blame at Iran courts. He added this is while they have remained silent over incidents like Shiraz explosion on April 12th, in which hundreds of people were killed or injured. The spokesman called on the impartial international communities to make a trip to Iran to visit the facilities available at prisons to be assured that all prisons here enjoy civil rights.
Mauritania's president, Saad Ould Sheikh Abdallah, has lost his vote of confidence in the parliament after 48 members resigned from the ruling party and said they will form a new party. The details are with Mohammed Haidar.
A political shakeup has rocked the National Pact for Democracy and Development ruling party in Mauritania. 48 members from the National Assembly in both houses have withdrawn from the ruling party following a long feud with the party's leader and prime minister, Yahya Weld Waqf. The outgoing cabinet members said that their resignations were due to the deteriorating political and economic situation in the country.
The government principles and the principles of society as a whole are becoming somewhat shaky, and they are heading toward the eye of the storm. In addition, the democratic path in the country started to deviate from its goals of development and construction.
The withdrawal by the 48 parliament members comes after the Weld Waqf-led government has refused to hold an emergency cabinet session to discuss outstanding issues. The creation of a High Court of Justice and the opening of an investigation into the urgent aid program launched by the Mauritanian president to counter inflation are among the issues topping the agenda. While some observers describe the latest move by the cabinet members as new efforts towards political escalation, some leaders inside the ruling party doubted that the refusal by the government to hold an emergency session was the reason for the withdrawal.
I do not believe the refusal by the government to hold an emergency session was the reason for the withdrawal by the cabinet members. This has nothing to do with the President of the Republic, but there appears to be a type of formality problems which led to this parliamentary sanction.
The ability of the ruling party to keep functioning after losing the majority of the parliamentary representatives will be the center of controversy among political knowledgeable sources in Mauritania. In addition, it is highly expected that these developments may lead to the drawing of a new political map occupied by future coalitions. The National Pact for Democracy and Development was formed after the toppling of the former ruling Republican Party in Mauritania. Ironically, the current ruling party may end in the same fate, with observers fearing that its end may come at the hands of its founders. This comes as talks are intensifying over a deep division between the Mauritanian president and the generals of the 8th Division of the military institution.
The Israeli Supreme Court postponed looking into a petition to stop the excavation operations by the Israeli authorities in the cemetery of the abandoned Al-Berwi village in East Accra. The petition to stop the excavations of the cemetery and the creation of a cow farm on it was made by the Aqsa Institution, an Islamic trust foundation in charge of renovating the holy sites.
Dozens of former village residents held a demonstration outside the Israeli Supreme Court in West Jerusalem, protesting the destruction of the cemetery and the attacks on holy Islamic and Christian sites.
The village of Al-Berwi, whose residents were forced to leave in 1948 during the Palestinian catastrophe, was not spared. On the rubble of this Palestinian village, the communal Jewish town of Achi Yehud was built, but several months ago, the new residents of this town started excavations in order to expand their cow farms and build additional ones. These excavations have reached the cemetery of Al-Berwi, thus provoking negative feelings among the remaining Palestinian residents who now live in close proximity.
They do not even let me pick the cactus pear from the trees that were planted by my father. Can you imagine this? God is the greatest. They excavated the graves and destroyed what was in them. What religion permits such actions?
The former residents of Al-Berwi and the Aqsa Institution went to the Israeli Supreme Court in an attempt to stop the desecration of the grave sites. Outside the Israeli court, dozens of Muslim and Christian residents of the village demonstrated holding signs condemning these actions.
Regrettably, what's happening here is a crime and a big violation to basic human rights and values. This is also a violation to basic religious and civic principles.
Even if the Israeli court would approve the construction of cow farms on the village cemetery, we will prevent the construction with our bodies. We will not let them build these farms no matter what happens.
منذ أعوام تعمل مؤسسة الأقصى على مسح شامل لجميع المقدسات.
Al-Aqsa Institution has been working for years to survey all Muslim and Christian holy sites and the approximately 530 villages whose residents were forced to leave them in 1948. According to historical maps and documents, thousands of religious sites were fenced in order to protect them, but hundreds of other sites were closed off and demolished by the Israeli authorities to prevent Palestinians from praying in them. The others were transformed into bars, nightclubs, museums, and Jewish temples. Even the dead have not been spared from the Palestinian catastrophe of 1948. Israel has not only destroyed Palestinian villages and expelled its people, it has also tried to erase what remained of these villages during the past 60 years. The remaining residents of these villages have been confronting the Israeli policies with all available means. Elias Karam, Al Jazeera, outside the Israeli Supreme Court, West Jerusalem.
At 8 o'clock tonight, Transport Minister Shaul Mofaz is set to declare his candidacy for leadership of Kadima. The move comes amidst allegations that Mofaz has used his authority as transport minister to recruit thousands of supporters from among employees of public transport companies. Ahead of the announcement, Mofaz paid a short 15-minute visit to Shas spiritual leader Rabbi Ovadia Yosef to convince the rabbi to keep Shas in the coalition should he be elected Kadima leader. Following the meeting, Shas leader Eli Yishai said the rabbi isn't playing favorites in the Kadima primaries. Late yesterday, Kadima leaders and activists gathered to agree on procedures for the September 17th primaries. Frontrunner Tzipi Livni managed to suppress a proposal that would have obliged all four candidates to declare that they will remain in Kadima even if they are defeated in the primaries. Livni also won the public endorsement of coalition chairman Yoel Hasson. So far, the other Kadima ministers and Knesset members have refrained from endorsing any of the candidates. This Friday, Prime Minister Ehud Olmert will be questioned by police once again on the so-called Olmert Tours affair. But before that, the Prime Minister has some diplomatic business to attend to. Tomorrow, Olmert is set to meet PA President Mahmoud Abbas at the Prime Minister's residence in Jerusalem. It will be the first meeting since Olmert announced his intention to resign. Tomorrow's talks also come in the wake of last Wednesday's Washington meeting between Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni, Chief Palestinian negotiator Ahmed Correa, and U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. PA negotiator Saib Erekat says that Abbas intends raising permanent status issues, IDF checkpoints on the West Bank, and prisoners. At the Paris Mediterranean Summit in July, Olmert promised to free Palestinian prisoners as a gesture to the PA president. The Saudi newspaper Al Watan reports that former Tanzim leader Marwan Barghouti is one of the prisoners that the PA wants released. The ceasefire in Gaza is temporary, and a broad-scale IDF operation against Hamas will come sooner or later. That was the message of Defense Minister Ehud Barak last night. Barak was addressing a Labour Party gathering in Jerusalem. At the same time, Barak defended the ceasefire, saying, quote, "We've never had reason to regret wars or other military operations which are launched from a position of strength." The defense minister called on the Treasury and the Housing Ministry to use the lull in violence in the south to roll up their sleeves, as he put it, and reinforce the homes of Negev residents. Barak also displayed an impressive familiarity with television reality shows as he delivered a political message. On Dancing with Stars or Survivor, he said, "You can try out a new host or new judges. But our situation in the real world," Barak stressed, "is that of a ship on stormy seas, which needs to be steered to safety by experienced hands."
After days of violent clashes between Fatah and Hamas, 87 members of the Gaza-based Hillis clan who fled to Israel have been taken to the West Bank town of Jericho.
While they're now relatively safe, many have been separated from their families in Gaza, and they don't know when they'll be able to go home. Noorode has more.
Under the sweltering heat of Jericho's sun, Israeli soldiers processed dozens of Fatah supporters from the Hillis and other Gaza families. After 2 days of humiliation and interrogation by the Israeli army, These men are handed over to the Palestinian Authority in Jericho, where they believe they will be safe. It was a long journey for them. On Saturday, they fled Gaza after being pursued by Hamas forces, which waged the most violent campaign against Fateh that Gaza has seen in 14 months. And their safety has come at a hefty price. They can only reach their homes and families in Gaza by phone now. Their stay in the West Bank is indefinite, confined by Israel to Jericho. It's a reminder to all Palestinians that they may be divided, but they all remain under the grip of Israeli occupation. As the night falls on Jericho, the men begin settling in their new accommodations. Bunker beds lined up. It's not home, but it will have to do.
I'm coming to my second home, but Gaza, of course, will always have a special place in our hearts. We can't let it go. We consider ourselves guests here with our brethren until both parts of the homeland unite again and we can go home.
Abdullah says he already misses his home and family in Gaza, but going back there to face Hamas justice is out of the question.
If there really was law in Gaza, I would resort to the law. There would be a court, lawyers, etc. But these people don't deal with people. Hamas commits terrible crimes and the world is just watching as if they don't care.
Ahmed Hillis, a senior Fateh leader who also fled Gaza on Saturday, remains detained by Israeli intelligence authorities. No indication yet of when he would be released. It will take these Gazans some time to get used to their new life, where their movement and family ties are limited by circumstance and violent threats from fellow Palestinians in faraway Gaza, hoping and waiting for a resolution to a violent political split that has forever changed their lives. Noorodi, Al Jazeera, Jericho in the occupied West Bank.
Hi, I'm John Hamilton, one of the producers here at Link TV. Now is a critical time for independent media coverage of the Middle East. Saber rattling between Washington and Tehran means a war in Iran could be around the corner. The U.S. now has more troops in Afghanistan than at any time since the 2001 invasion. And the war in Iraq is well into its 5th year. All of this and a recent National Geographic poll found that fewer than 40% of young Americans could even find Iraq on a map. Well, if you're a regular viewer of Link TV and Mosaic, I'm guessing that not only can you find Iraq on a map, but you have insight into the day-to-day lives of Iraqis that far too few of us share. That's because Mosaic brings you direct news from the Middle East. You'll see TV programs from places like Baghdad, Abu Dhabi, Tel Aviv, and Tehran. It's a perspective you just aren't going to find anywhere else on your TV. This program began in 2001 with the support of foundations. Now, 7 years later, the show has grown in popularity and is about 90% viewer supported. That means we need to raise $200,000 by the fall in order to keep Mosaic on the air. We've done it before, and I know with your help we can do it again. So please call 1-866-485-8848 or pledge online at linktv.org. You can track our progress toward that $200,000 goal with our fundraising thermometer. Give it a click, and you can lend your support to push that total a little higher. The fact is, television is expensive to produce, and there aren't many ways to pay for it. Here at Link, we rely on your support to give us the independence we need to produce programs like Mosaic. That means we're not beholden to corporate advertisers, unlike so many other news programs in today's increasingly consolidated landscape. Recently, the legendary broadcaster Bill Moyers spoke about that trend. He said, "Media consolidation is a corrosive social force. It robs us of our voice in public affairs. It pollutes the political culture, and it turns the debate over profound issues into a shouting match of polarized views." You won't find that shouting match here at Link TV. You'll just find intelligent programs like Mosaic, shows that humanize rather than demonize people in countries like those of the Middle East. Shows that make us think it's possible to use words rather than weapons to solve the problems we face in this world. If you know the value of that, please call the number on your screen or visit linktv.org with your contribution to Mosaic. Let's keep world news from the Middle East healthy for a long time to come. And thank you so much for your support.
Get more news about the Middle East online at linktv.org/mosaic. The Mosaic webpage offers a complete archive of Mosaic programs, program transcripts, the Mosaic Video Podcast, and the Mosaic Intelligence Report, a weekly analysis of the hottest stories from the Middle East. The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible with the support of viewers like you. Thank you. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.